so disgusting. I'm so ashamed of him.
Why? How? I don't even understand how you could, bring yourself to do that to somebody who's, that big.
You heartless monster. You have no heart, or feelings, or love. Prison is too good for you. This is hard to say, but may God have mercy on your soul. We loved you like a son. We trusted you. Your faithful wife trusted you. Your children adored you. This is something we will never get over. We will always mourn the loss of our family. I am still struggling to understand how and why this tragedy occurred. Those words came from the family of Shannon Watts, speaking directly to the man who destroyed everything they knew, a man they welcomed into their lives, a man their daughter loved, a man their grandchildren called Daddy. And when investigators were asked whether they believed Chris Watts would ever provide honest answers about why he murdered his pregnant wife and 2 young daughters, the response was clear. They did not think he would give an honest assessment of why he did what he did, how he did what he did, and they did not think there would ever be a satisfactory answer for anyone. 8 years have passed since August 13th, 2018. 8 years of investigators combing through evidence. 8 years of documentaries dissecting the same timeline. 8 years of podcasts analyzing the same 2,000 pages of discovery documents. 8 years of millions of people trying to understand how a father could do what Chris Watts did to Bella, Celeste, Shanann, and their unborn son Nico. And in all of that time, across all of that scrutiny, one person walked away. She sat across from investigators 6 separate times. She answered their questions. She cried in what appeared to be the right moments. She even called the police herself. And for 8 years, the world largely accepted the version of events she handed them. But something changed. In 2026, a man who spent 7 months in the cell directly next to Chris Watts published an account of what he says Watts told him in private, word by word, conversation by conversation. And when you place what that cellmate claims against evidence that was already sitting inside the official discovery file, a pattern emerges that no documentary, no podcast, and no investigation has ever fully assembled in one place until right now. Before we go any further, if you want to see where this evidence leads, if you want to understand what has been sitting in plain sight for 8 years, do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe to True Crime Vic, because what you are about to hear is going to change the way you see this case forever. I am not going to walk you through the basic timeline of August 13th. You already know it. You have known it for years. What I'm going to walk you through is what the evidence shows happened around that morning. Before it, during it, after it, and the one person whose name keeps appearing in phone records, in search history, in GPS data, in forensic reports, who has never once been made to formally answer for any of it. Stay with me, because by the time this video ends, you are not going to be asking whether Chris Watts belongs in prison. You are going to be asking a completely different question, and it is a question that 8 years later, nobody in an official capacity has ever been forced to answer. Let me establish the foundation before we go anywhere else, because this matters. Nichol Kessinger was never charged with any crime. She sat for multiple recorded interviews with law enforcement. She handed over her phone. In the official court record, she is classified as a witness, a woman who unknowingly fell for a married man who turned out to be a murderer. That is the official story, and that story has always had problems. Not theory problems, not speculation from online forums. Documented, time-stamped, forensically established problems sitting inside the public discovery record that nobody in a position of authority has ever been made to explain. Let us start with what single-handedly dismantles the entire foundation of her account to investigators. Nichol Kessinger told law enforcement clearly and consistently across multiple sessions that she genuinely believed Chris Watts was nearly divorced when their relationship began. She thought the separation was already underway. She believed she was not breaking up a family because the family had already effectively ended. That was her pillar. Her entire defense of her own conduct rested on it. In her recorded interview, she explained that when she met Chris sometime around early June 2018, he was not wearing a wedding ring. Every time she talked to him, he did not mention being in a relationship. He did not even mention his kids right away. Then one day, around Father's Day, he told her he had 2 daughters. She thought it was kind of cute. He seemed excited about them. Then he mentioned he had a significant other, and he told her those 2 were in the process of separation. When investigators asked if she ever gave Chris books or articles about saving his marriage, she said no. But she did tell him, whether through text or phone, that he should take the time to read some articles about what separation does to kids. She wanted him to understand the impact on children. That was her account. She believed the marriage was ending. She thought she was dating a man going through divorce. Now let us look at what her phone was actually doing. On July 24th, 2018, weeks into their relationship, she searched the following phrase on Google. "Man I am having an affair with says he will leave his wife. Not man I am dating who is separated. Not man going through a divorce. Affair," her word. Her search, her phone. You do not use the word affair if you genuinely believe you are dating a man who is mutually and openly separating from his wife. That word only comes from someone who understands they are in the middle of something that is still very much intact. That was July 24th. On August 4th, while Chris was in North Carolina on a family trip that Nichol herself later claimed she had encouraged, she spent 2 consecutive hours searching for wedding dresses online. 2 full hours. On August 8th, Chris still in North Carolina, she searched "marrying your mistress." Mistress. Again, her language, her search. She knew exactly what she was. Now hold those 3 searches against this single detail. On that same August 4th, the same afternoon she was browsing wedding dresses, she also searched both Chris and Shannan's Facebook accounts. She could see Shannan's page. She could see the pregnancy announcement Shannan had posted publicly weeks before. And in all 6 of her interviews with law enforcement, Nichol Kessinger stated clearly that she had absolutely no idea Shannan was pregnant. She said discovering the pregnancy through news coverage was one of the most shocking moments of her life. She said that if she had known about the baby, she would never have been involved with Chris at all. But she accessed Shannan's Facebook page on August 4th. The pregnancy had been publicly announced weeks before. She told investigators she had no idea. Now I want to bring you to a data point that the district attorney's own office confirmed was real and then never pursued. This is not a rumor. This is not online speculation. This is something Michael Rourke, the Weld County District Attorney, who prosecuted Chris Watts, confirmed on record when pressed directly by reporters. Forensic analysis of Nichol Kessinger's phone showed that she was searching Shannan Watts by name as early as January 2018. She told investigators her relationship with Chris did not begin until June 2018. She was searching for Shannan 5 months before she claims to have known Shannan existed. When reporters asked the DA whether this data was real, he confirmed it. He stated it came directly from the phone. He said it was not a reporting error. And when asked why that anomaly was never independently investigated, he stated that because Chris Watts pleaded guilty, the investigation did not continue to that point. Stop there. The district attorney of Weld County confirmed on record that a key witness in a quadruple homicide had been searching the victim's name 5 months before she claims to have known the victim existed. And the official response was, "We did not pursue it because we already had a conviction." That is what is on record. And in 2026, that anomaly sits exactly where it has always been in the record. Unresolved, unexplained. One of the most repeated defenses of Nichol Kessinger has always been this. She came forward herself. She called the police voluntarily. She had nothing to hide. It sounds like the behavior of someone with a clear conscience, except the sequence does not hold. On August 15th, 2018, 2 days after the murders, CBI agent Tammy Lee received a phone call at 5 o'clock in the morning from Anadarko Petroleum's security manager, Tony Husky. He informed investigators that a contracted employee had been exchanging suggestive messages with their primary suspect. He gave them two names, Chris Watts and Nichol Kessinger. Law enforcement already knew who she was. Approximately 2 hours after that call, at 9:50 in the morning, Nichol Kessinger contacted investigators. She was not being courageous. She was not being transparent. She was getting ahead of something she could already feel closing in. And here is what removes any remaining doubt about that. On that exact same day, the same day she supposedly reached out to cooperate with an active murder investigation, Nichol Kessinger was searching Google for. Can cops trace text messages? How long do phone companies keep text messages? What is the difference between text message content and text message detail? And then she deleted every one of those searches. A woman cooperating fully and honestly does not spend her cooperation day researching the boundaries of what law enforcement can find. That is the behavior of someone calculating what they can and cannot hide. And it was not her first round of deletion. Because on August 14th, before she had made any contact with investigators, she had already wiped her phone clean. All text messages, all photos, her contacts, her emails, everything that connected her to Chris Watts, gone. She then instructed Chris to delete everything on his end. And she told her close friend Charlotte, who had received photos of Chris from Nichol, along with detailed conversations about him, to delete their entire thread as well. Deleting material evidence during an active homicide investigation has a legal name. It is called obstruction of justice. It was confirmed. It was documented in the discovery record. And when investigators raised it with her directly, when Agent Kobach brought it up in her second interview, Nichol Kessinger's explanation was that she was grossed out by Chris, that she simply did not want his name appearing on her phone anymore. That answer was accepted. The conversation moved on. Now I need your complete attention, because what comes next is the piece of this case that the evidence has always pointed toward, and that no official investigation ever satisfactorily confronted. Nichol Kessinger drove the same commute to work every single day. Investigators subpoenaed months of her phone records. The cell tower data mapped that commute with total consistency. Same roads, same towers, morning after morning, predictable, established, uniform, until the morning of August 13th, 2018. At 6:16 in the morning, on the day the Watts family was murdered, Nichol Kessinger's phone pinged a cell tower it had never once pinged in all those months of prior records. That tower placed her device in the proximity of one specific address, the Watts family home in Frederick, Colorado, the same address she had searched on Google less than 36 hours before. Let me give you the precise timing, because context is everything. Chris Watts had driven away from that address at approximately 5:45 that morning. By 6:16, he was already on the highway heading northeast toward the Survey 319 oil well site. He was not at the house. He had been gone for 30 minutes. At 6:16, while his phone pinged towers along the highway, her phone pinged a tower near his house, and she placed a call, not to Chris, to a man named Jim. Jim is not a peripheral figure in this case. Discovery records and subsequent investigative interviews established that Jim was embedded in the social world shared by Chris and Nichol. There are photographs of all three of them together at the Colorado sand dunes, one of the locations Chris and Nichol visited during their relationship. Days after the murders, when Detective Kobach asked Nichol whether Jim could serve as her alibi witness, whether he could confirm her location on the morning of August 13th, here is exactly what she said. She told the detective that Jim did not know Chris, that he did not know anything. The detective explained that Jim could confirm with one phone call that she came in at 3:45 and they would be done. She said totally. But when the detective asked if she would provide Jim's information if they could not find her phone records, she said she did not really want to involve him, that it was not fair to him, that if she did not have to do that, she would prefer not to. Her alibi witness, the one person who could confirm where she was on the morning her lover murdered his family, and she said it would not be fair to name him. Detective Kobach did not press her. He moved on. The question of where Nichol Kessinger was between 5:45 and 8 o'clock on August 13th, 2018, was never formally answered in any interview. It was never independently verified through any other means, and across the entire run of records reviewed after August 13th, her phone never once pinged that Frederick Tower again. Not on any subsequent morning, not on any workday, not ever, because she had no reason to be near that house after that day. Anadarko Petroleum had security cameras throughout their facility, including coverage of their parking lot. Footage that could have confirmed exactly when Nichol Kessinger arrived at work that morning was accessible and existed. No publicly verified timestamp from that footage was ever produced. Her time card was referenced by Nichol herself in her first interview. She mentioned when she clocked out. She never mentioned when she clocked in, and no investigator ever asked. Of everything in this case, every deleted search, every unanswered question, every gap in the official record, this is the detail that stops serious case researchers cold. Because this one detail does not have a credible innocent explanation, and it was sitting in the discovery file the entire time. Survey 319 is the Anadarko oil well site, where Chris Watts drove on the morning of August 13th. It is where he buried Shanann. It is where Bella and Celeste's bodies were found inside crude oil tanks. It is the crime scene. In Nichol Kessinger's very first interview with investigators, she told them that Chris going to the oil field that morning was routine, normal field operations, nothing unusual. 6 days later, after investigators received her phone records, her account changed completely. Suddenly, she remembered an extensive conversation with Chris the night before the murders in which she questioned him specifically about why he needed to go to Survey 319 first thing Monday morning. Her documented words to investigators were, "That is not your job. Why would you have to go check the release? You are not part of the environmental team." She knew that site. She knew his role. She knew it was not normal. And then she disclosed something that has never received the attention it deserves. On the evening of August 13th, hours after Chris had been at that location, she texted him asking him to send her a photographic proof that he had been at Survey 319 that day. She asked for evidence of his presence at the crime scene on the day the crime was committed. Now consider the full documented record of their communication. Months of daily contact, texts, calls, exchanges reviewed in detail by investigators. There is not a single other instance of Nichol Kessinger asking Chris Watts to photograph his location on any workday. Not once, across months of records, except on the one morning he visited Survey 319, except on the day he drove his family there. When this information came up during her interview, when Kobach had that detail in front of him, he did not ask why. He did not ask what prompted a request she had never made on any other day in their entire relationship. He did not ask why Survey 319 specifically, and not any of the other locations Chris visited that same morning. He moved on. A witness in a quadruple homicide tells investigators she requested photographic proof of the primary suspect's presence at what would be confirmed as the crime scene on the day the crime was committed. And the investigator says nothing. I want to pause here for a moment, because I know how deep into this evidence we are, and I want to make sure you stay with me for what comes next, because what I'm about to walk you through in the final section of this part is what I believe is the most damning sequence in this entire case. Not the phone ping, not the wedding dress searches, not even the Survey 319 photo request. What comes next is the documented record of what happened on the night of the murders and the calls made in the hours that followed, that no official investigation ever formally confronted. Stay with me. The night of August 13th, into the early hours of August 14th, between 9:48 in the evening and 2:18 in the morning. Phone records show Nichol Kessinger and Chris Watts in multiple calls totaling 156 minutes. 2 hours and 36 minutes of conversation on the night of the murders, while Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and unborn Nico had been at that oil field for over 12 hours. When Detective Kobach walked Nichol through those calls, reading the timestamps, the durations, Asking what was discussed, here is what she offered. She said she would almost want to come in there and drag and drop all of her texts to where they were going. She offered to come in and manually reorganize her own messages to fill the gaps she could not account for verbally. That meeting never happened. She never came back. Now hold that against this. In those same interview sessions, Nichol provided detailed, specific, chronologically precise accounts of events from weeks and months earlier in the relationship. Specific restaurants, specific dates, specific conversations she recalled with confidence and fluency. Her memory for July was sharp and clear. Her memory for the night of August 13th, the single most important night in the entire case, was, in her own words, fragmented. Memory works selectively when the stakes are selective. What I have just walked you through is not speculation. It is not theory. It is not the work of online forums piecing together timelines that do not exist. Every single detail I have presented to you is documented in the official discovery file, confirmed by the Weld County District Attorney's Office, time-stamped in phone records, or captured in recorded interviews with law enforcement. The January 2018 search for Shannon's name, confirmed by the DA. The affair and mistress searches, documented in phone records. The deletion of evidence on August 14th, confirmed in discovery. The cell tower ping near the Watts home at 6:16 on the morning of the murders, documented in subpoenaed records. The request for a photograph of Survey 319 on the day of the crime, stated by Nichol Kessinger herself in a recorded interview. And across every one of these points, the response from investigators was the same. They moved on. They did not press. They did not pursue independent verification. They did not ask the follow-up questions that the evidence demanded. Why? Because Chris Watts pleaded guilty. Because the case was closed. Because, in the eyes of the system, justice had been served. But 8 years later, families are still grieving. Questions are still unanswered. And one person walked away from a quadruple homicide investigation after deleting evidence, refusing to name an alibi witness, being placed near the crime scene by cell tower data, and spending over 2.5 hours on the phone with a man who had just murdered his entire family without ever being asked to formally account for any of it. We are going to go deeper. We are going to examine what Chris Watts told his cellmate about that night. We are going to look at the timeline investigators never fully pursued, and we are going to ask the question that has been sitting in this case for 8 years, waiting for someone in an official capacity to answer it. If this investigation affected you the way it has affected millions of others, if you believe these questions deserve answers, then do something about it right now. Like this video. Subscribe to True Crime Vic. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, because the only way these questions get answered is if enough people refuse to let them be ignored. And when it drops, you are going to see this case in a way you never have before. Stay with me. What Nichol Kessinger said that night is more revealing than what she claimed she could not remember. When Detective Kobach pressed her on why she could not sleep, why the calls kept happening through the early hours of August 14th, why she was distressed, she said this. These are her documented words from the recorded interview. All those phone calls at the very end of the night. That was me freaking out like I cannot sleep. I am really scared. Where is your family? That was me freaking out and him calling to try to assure me, just making sure everything was okay. I am really scared. Where is your family? Let those words sit for a moment, because they contradict the entire foundation of the account she gave investigators. In her official statement, Nichol said that she assumed Shannon had simply gone to a friend's house. Couples argue. She needed space. She would come back. That was the explanation she gave for why she was not alarmed when Chris mentioned his family was gone. But if you genuinely believe a woman has gone to cool off at a friend's house, there is nothing to be scared of. There is no reason to lose sleep. There is no reason to need reassurance at 2 a.m. that everything is okay. You are only scared at 2 a.m. if you already know or strongly suspect that the situation is something entirely different from a couple needing space. And then came the moment that may be the single most damning detail in Nichol Kessinger's entire documented record. At 1:51 in the morning, on August 14th, Nichol called Chris. At 1:58, while they were still on that call, Chris began receiving calls from the Frederick Police Department. They ended their call. Chris called the officer back at 2:05 using his work phone, and within seconds of that police call beginning, Nichol called Chris's personal phone, both calls running simultaneously. The investigating officer on the work phone, Nichol on the personal phone at 2 in the morning. While an officer was beginning to ask questions about where his family had gone, investigators who reviewed these records noted what the sequence implies. She was listening in, monitoring in real time what the officer knew and what he did not. She has never been asked to explain why she called back at that exact moment. That call at 2:05 on August 14th was the last documented communication between Nichol Kessinger and Chris Watts. Shortly after, she deleted virtually everything from her phone before surrendering it to investigators. Why does someone with nothing to hide call back the moment a police conversation begins at 2 in the morning? Why does someone who believed Shanann simply left to cool down need to know in real time what an officer is asking? Those questions are in the record. They have never been answered. In 2026, Dylan Tallman, Chris Watts' former cellmate at Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin, released a book series titled The Cell Next Door, containing what he says are direct accounts of conversations he had with Watts during the 7 months they were housed next to each other. I'm going to be completely transparent about how I treat this source, because that transparency is what separates this channel from noise. Dylan Tallman is a self-admitted career criminal. His book originates from the words of Chris Watts. Chris Watts is not a reliable narrator of his own life. He is a man who, in verified prison letters reported by multiple news outlets, compared his life sentence to the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. A man who has consistently distributed blame to every woman around him while framing himself as someone who was led astray. Nothing Chris Watts says is accepted here at face value. The only meaningful question when evaluating Tallman's claims is this: does what he reports align with evidence that already existed in the discovery record before his book was ever written? On several specific points, the answer is yes. Tallman writes that on the night of August 12th, during the 111-minute phone call between Chris and Nichol, she issued an ultimatum. According to Tallman's account, she told Chris directly, "It is your family or me. We cannot independently confirm that conversation took place. But here is what we absolutely can confirm, using only evidence that existed before Tallman published a single word." At 10:33 in the morning on August 13th, 9 minutes after hanging up with Shanann's mother, who had just been told by Chris that Shanann went to a friend's house, Chris Watts opened Google and searched for hotels in Aspen, Colorado. 9 minutes later, he called a mountain resort directly. A man who has just committed 4 murders, who has just fed a cover story to his mother-in-law, who is managing co-workers by text to keep them away from the crime scene, is searching for resort hotels in the mountains. What is the innocent explanation for that sequence? If this crime was driven purely by impulsive rage, as Chris repeatedly claimed in his early interviews, you do not search Aspen resort hotels 9 minutes after manufacturing a story for your grieving mother-in-law. You only do that if you believe your next chapter has already been arranged. If you believe someone else is managing the rest of the details. If you are not improvising but executing a plan. Dylan Tallman did not create that hotel search. It was in the discovery file. He arrived on top of suspicion that was already fully documented and fully established. And there is one more thing Tallman recorded that reveals something essential about the man at the center of all of this. In a prison conversation about how the public perceives him, Chris Watts reportedly said, "I wish people would judge me on my whole past instead of just that one day. That one day. The day he strangled his pregnant wife. The day he drove his daughters to a remote oil field and killed them." He refers to those acts as that one day, a single blemish against an otherwise acceptable history. That is not remorse. That is a man seeking partial credit, weighing years of ordinary fatherhood against a morning of premeditated violence. and expecting the arithmetic to come out somewhere in the middle. It will not. If you are still with me, if this investigation is affecting you the way it has affected millions of others who refuse to let these questions disappear, then I need you to do something right now. Like this video. Subscribe to True Crime Vic, because what comes next is the part of this case that almost nobody talks about. The women who solved it before anyone could finish covering their tracks. Before we reach the final section, this case requires a moment that it consistently does not get. Chris Watts was identified within 24 hours, not because of sophisticated surveillance technology, not because of investigative procedure alone, but because of the women who loved Shanann and who moved faster than he ever anticipated. Nicole Atkinson had been with Shanann in Arizona on that work trip. She had watched her friend navigate the quiet collapse of her marriage across the entire weekend. She had driven Shanann home from the airport at nearly 2 a.m. on the 13th and stood at the door until she was safely inside. When 9 o'clock arrived, and Shanann missed her prenatal appointment scheduled for testing on her pregnancy with Nico, Nicole did not wait. She did not send another text. She drove to the doctor's office, confirmed Shanann was a no-show, and went directly to 2008-25 Saratoga Trail. Her son looked through the garage window. He saw Shannan's car. He saw the girls' car seats, still inside. Nicole Atkinson called the police. While Chris was at the oil field site managing co-workers by text, Nicole stood on that driveway and refused to move until someone with a badge arrived. She is a primary reason this case broke open in hours rather than days. Cassie, one of Shannan's closest friends, cut through every manipulation tactic Chris attempted with a single response. When he reached out and wrote, "I really do not want you to think I am a bad person, Cassie," she replied. "Right now, Chris, I do not care about you. I do not care about your relationship or what type of person you are or are not. And I am not trying to be rude when I say that." She had one question. Where is Shanann? Everything else was noise. And Addie, the moment she got off a phone call with Chris that afternoon, sent a single message to the friend group that stands as one of the most precise things said by anyone in the first hours of this case. The police need to look at Chris's cell phone and his computer. One phone conversation was all she needed. She had read exactly who she was dealing with and named the evidence that would break the case open. She was right. These women compressed the timeline before anyone could finish covering their tracks. Their refusal to accept the explanations being handed to them is the reason evidence existed before more of it could disappear. They have never received the credit this case owes them. Let me lay this out with precision, because this is not a list of theories. This is a documented record of what the official investigation confirmed, and then did not pursue. 1. Her phone pinged a cell tower near the Watts family home at 6:16 in the morning on August 13th. A tower her phone had never once pinged in months of prior records, and never pinged again afterward. No investigator formally asked her to account for this location. No official explanation was ever produced. 2. Less than 36 hours before that ping, she had searched the Watts family home address online. That search was in the discovery record. It was never raised as a direct point of confrontation in any of her 6 interviews. 3. She requested photographic proof of Chris's presence at Survey 319, the crime scene on the day of the murders. This is documented in discovery. In months of prior records, she had never once asked him to photograph his work location on any other day. The investigator who had this information did not follow up. 4. She spent 156 minutes on the phone with Chris on the night of the murders. Calls she could not coherently account for when interviewed. She offered to come in and manually reorganize her messages to fill those gaps. She never returned. No investigator followed up. 5. She called Chris's personal phone the moment a police call connected on his work phone at 2 a.m. while Shanann was still classified as missing. No investigator ever formally asked her to explain the timing of that specific call. 6. She deleted the entire content of her phone before surrendering it to investigators. The forensic lab report, issued by Detective Michael Prill on October 30th, 2018, confirmed in writing that the technology available at the Northern Colorado Forensic Laboratory did not allow for complete data extraction from Apple devices. Hundreds, possibly thousands of messages were never recovered. Prill made this limitation explicit in his report. He was not speculating about what might be missing. He was documenting in writing for the record that the investigation had an irreversible technological ceiling, and that everything sitting above that ceiling would never be seen by anyone. The report was filed, the limitation was acknowledged, and the investigation was declared complete anyway. 7. During one of her interviews, she casually referenced using Skype with Chris, a platform that carries entirely separate message records from a standard phone thread, requiring a separate legal request to obtain. Skype records were never requested. 8. Chris Watts's confirmed use of Snapchat, a platform whose fundamental design auto-deletes messages, was documented inside the discovery file. Snapchat records were never subpoenaed. 9. She had searched Shanann Watts by name as early as January 2018, 5 months before she claims to have met Chris. This was confirmed as real data by Nichol Rourke on record. It was never independently investigated because Chris Watts entered a guilty plea. 10. The source of the oxycodone Chris used on Shanann, confirmed present in her system by the toxicology report, remains officially unknown. Chris has refused to name the source. He stated it is a secret he will take to his grave. No official investigation has ever answered that question. Those are 10 documented, confirmed, publicly verifiable gaps in an investigation that was officially declared complete. Any one of them, individually, can be rationalized. All 10 together in sequence, aligned with the timeline of a quadruple homicide, cannot. Chris Watts is 40 years old. He is inside Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin. He works as a custodian. He attends Bible study. He writes letters. He is serving 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He will die inside that building. That part of justice is secured, and it is exactly right. Nichol Kessinger changed her name. She left Colorado. She gave one interview to the Denver Post in late 2018, described herself as a victim of Chris's manipulation, and has not spoken publicly since. She was never charged. And here, with absolute precision, is what that means and what it does not mean. Nichol Rourke made a legal determination that the evidence as it existed at that specific moment did not meet the threshold required for prosecution. That is a legal calculation made at a specific point in time. It is not an acquittal. It is not a declaration of innocence. It is a prosecutorial decision made at a specific moment before 10% of the documented gaps I just described were ever formally pursued. In his own interview with Investigation Discovery, Rourke described Nichol Kessinger's information as A, and these are his words, bombshell that helped build the case against Chris. He described Chris as appearing to have had every intention of starting a new life with her. That is not the language of a man who believed she had nothing to do with any of it. He said the evidence did not support charging her. He did not say she was innocent. Those are different statements, and the difference between them is exactly where the unanswered questions live. Shanann Watts was 34 years old. She documented her life openly, her marriage, her daughters, her business, her hope, because she believed in what she was building. She was not naive. She was not blind. She knew something was deeply wrong. In the weeks before August 13th, she searched for marriage counselors. She ordered a book on rebuilding relationships. She wrote her husband a letter telling him she would fight for them. She did everything a person is supposed to do when the life they love is beginning to fracture. And none of it was enough, because the fracture was not an accident. It was a plan. Bella was 4 years old. August 13th was supposed to be her first day of school. Celeste was 3. Nico never took a single breath outside of his mother. None of them had any say in any of it. The phone records are there. The forensic reports are there. The GPS coordinates are there. The interview transcripts are there. The evidence does not become less true because it remains unacted upon, and it does not become less worth knowing There is one final piece that belongs here. Detective Michael Prill submitted his forensic data report to the Weld County District Attorney's Office on October 30th, 2018. It was unlike anything else in the entire discovery file. For the first time, someone inside law enforcement was writing in a way that made clear they were no longer fully accepting the narrative Nichol Kessinger had constructed since August 15th. Prill documented her search history in specific detail. He flagged her deletion of critical evidence. He stated with certainty that Chris was communicating with Kessinger through channels beyond what had been examined. He noted the secret calculator application through which images were arriving entirely outside any standard text thread, images that required a separate investigation to trace, an investigation that never happened. And he described her voicemails and her general affect across the evidence he reviewed using one specific word, his word, in an official government document. Creepy. That is the word a forensic detective used inside an official report to describe the woman law enforcement had classified as a protected cooperative witness. Now consider the standard legal process. Discovery materials travel from the DA's office to the court, to defense counsel, and then to the defendant. That process typically takes several days. By approximately November 2nd, 2018, Chris Watts very likely had Detective Prill's full report in his hands at Weld County Jail. On November 6th, 2018, exactly 1 week after that report was issued, Chris Watts accepted a guilty plea. No trial, no witness testimony under oath, no Nichol Kessinger on a stand being cross-examined by a defense attorney who had read every single word of that discovery file. The case closed. Whether Chris Watts accepted that plea purely to avoid the death penalty, or whether he understood that a trial would force questions into a courtroom that certain people needed to keep out of one, is something only he can answer. But 1 week between that forensic report and that guilty plea is not a coincidence. That explains itself. If you stayed with me to the end of this, thank you. I genuinely mean that. I want to ask you 2 specific questions in the comments. I read everything you write. First, the phone ping at 6:16, placing Nichol Kessinger's device near the Watts family home on the morning of the murders. Does that single piece of evidence change how you have understood this case? Second, the 10 documented gaps. The Skype records never requested. The Snapchat subpoena that never happened. The Survey 319 photo request. The alibi witness she refused to name. The January 2018 search for Shannon. Do you believe the investigation was complete? Tell me where you stand. Tell me what landed hardest. Tell me what I missed. And if this video gave you something new, something assembled in one place that you had not seen before, share it. Not for numbers, but because these questions deserve to reach more people than they currently have. Subscribe to True Crime Vic, because we are not finished with this story, not even close. We go deeper into the deleted phone data, the specific interview moments researchers say were never properly followed up on, and what legal options, if any, exist in 2026, when the primary conviction is already secured, but the investigation around it never fully was. For Shannon, for Bella, for Celeste, for Nico, justice is not a moment. It is a direction, and we keep moving toward it.